Welcome to the Be Make Do Soul Makers podcast, where we explore what it takes to pursue your calling as an artist with spiritual wholeness and creative freedom. I'm your host, Lisa Smith, and I'm here with my producer and co-host, Dan ABH.
Hello, everyone.
So today we are continuing our conversation about the artist archetypes, which is our theme this season, kind of trying to think about what motivates us to create, what motivates you to create in your own unique and specific way. And today we're going to get into the Maker Archetype.
So before we get into that, though, first of all, I just want to say thanks for everyone that has been doing the quiz. It's been overwhelmingly awesome to see the amount of people that are taking this quiz. And with that many people that have taken the quiz, a couple of questions have came up. So I'd love for us to address those. So ready for the first one?
Let's go.
Where did this quiz come from?
Great question. Well, it came from us. We made it.
Thank you. Next question.
The end. We made it for soul makers and for the podcast as a tool. Actually, it started as something I developed years ago as I was observing over 20 plus years working with artists and creatives, observing patterns in people, and when they're trying to figure out what choices should I make as a creative, as an artist, what path should I pursue? The angst and the tension that comes from trying to pursue somebody else's idea or vision of success and not being true to yourself and true to what really motivates you. Time and time again, I find people get into spaces that then they start hating what they do, or they don't have time to make art the way that they wanted to because they're following somebody's plan for quote unquote success. So we created this as just a fun way to get people thinking about why you create. This is something that we created based on our observations. So the science, there's no science behind it at all. It's just observable realities. And then we've borrowed from other types of quizzes and stuff like that to help with some of the language. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Great answer, because that's the truth.
Because that's the truth.
All right. And then there's a few more questions here, but I think this one we should address too.
Okay.
Because I know this has been coming up a lot for people and myself. What if I am more than one archetype?
Yes. That is a good question. And the truth is, of course you are. You're more than one archetype, right? So, because the way that this quiz is shaped is not a personality test. Okay. So it's not like the Enneagram or even a spiritual gifts test or like Strengths Finders or something like that. It's not that robust. Sorry to say. It's really geared towards asking you 5 simple questions that are kind of sneaky ways to ask you why you do what you do, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and also to turn on the light bulb that we are all so different. Even if we could both be musicians, we could both be writers, we could both be poets, but why I write poetry could be very different than why you write poetry. And if we understand that, then we can start asking even better questions about what is going to be fulfilling for you in your creative life. What kind of support do you need in your creative life, et cetera? So most of us are probably several of them, or maybe 60% one thing and 40% another. Does that math add up? Or 20% everything, or something like that. And that's good. You know, you can look at the other archetypes once you take your quiz. Look at the other archetypes. Maybe something about that also resonates for you, and you create your own little bag of understanding. It plays out differently depending on who you are. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are on to our third archetype so far in this series, and we are about to get into
the Maker.
The Maker. Let's do it.
All right, let's get started with the Maker. So to describe the maker, I think the one sentence that we have at the top of that page is great. It says, to you, everything is a creative project. It's the joy of making that drives you. You're just wired that way. And I think that fully explains what the maker is. Again, we're talking about our motivations. So a maker is somebody who is extremely in love with the craft. They want to explore every possible sound that guitar will make and bend it into new and innovative ways. They enjoy the way the clay shapes and what happens in that, and maybe even the technical components of how that's made or how pigment is made. They're very, very invested in being good at what they do and being good at the craft. But that also brings enjoyment. So that is a fulfilling experience to just make something, to create something. I think that is the underlying most important thing about the maker. I, for instance, am not a maker. I'm not at all. I appreciate craftsmanship and I appreciate what that brings you. And I do enjoy the craft and I do enjoy doing it, but it's not why. So, for me as an actor, I can get so nerdy about acting and about theater. I love thinking about it. I love doing it. But what really motivates me to create is the possibility of playing with ideas and connecting things and helping new things to happen. And so I'm just as satisfied doing that, like in this arena, as I am on a stage. For a maker, that would not work. For an actor maker, it's got to be acting. It's got to be on stage.
Right. And, I swing several ways when it comes to the archetypes, but this was the one, Lisa, that I was sure when we were putting this together and looking at it, I was like, I'm a maker.
Yeah.
I mean, even just looking at the description, I'm like, oh, I'm such a maker. And maybe I was at one point in my life, maybe in my 20s and early 30s. I'm not going to say how old I am. That I definitely felt the passion that's kind of spilling out of this description right now, where it's so focused on making things. And at the time, I didn't understand where that was coming from, which is a beautiful feeling, to be honest with you. It's just like, oh man, like I just can't wait to do this. And I have to do this. I have to make something, create something, whether that's music or make an event or put on a show or whatever it is. And I think as I got older, again, I'm not going to say how old I am, I definitely started to veer off from that. I do still think, if we talk about percentages, I definitely will rank in the maker, but it is not my top one. And I figure when I get into my later years, I may become a prophetic critic. Who knows?
Yeah, it's possible. And I mean, like the question was asking before, a lot of artists, just by virtue of the fact that they're artists, have some of the maker. Obviously we love to work with the materials and work with within the bounds of whatever our creative tools are. But the differentiation is that why do you get out of bed in the morning? What difference does it make? Like, for instance, okay, so we can talk examples a little bit here.
Yeah.
I was thinking that I think Prince is a maker, or Bjork. Or even I was thinking like Stanley Kubrick, probably Frida Kahlo. And here's what gets interesting with these guys, because you might say, actually, I was talking with my husband Jay about this before, and he's like, I don't know about Prince and Bjork as makers, because their work is visionary. They've Prince has transformed landscapes within music, and Bjork is so insanely creative that her work is visionary. But there's a difference in the motivation. So from what I've seen in interviews and stuff with Prince,
those are the best.
Yeah, he
So
really
good.
does not care what anybody says. He doesn't care what anybody thinks. And I think my impression is, I think he loves that people love his music, but he's not creating it for them. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like what I've heard is that he has like vaults of music that's never even been released. Like he just was constantly creating. He had such an incredible amount of talent, but love for the music and the sound.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you another fun factoid about Prince is that when he was approached to do the 1989 Batman film, the studio was not expecting that's what the soundtrack was going to sound like.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so 100% Prince, like what they assumed that it was going to be. And it just sounded like a pop record, you know what I mean? Instead of like this dark, brooding thing that maybe Tim Burton or the execs and Warner Brothers were trying to go for. And I just can imagine, and again, don't quote me on this, but I can just imagine Prince just saying, you asked me to do this thing, I'm going to follow through. I'm going to do it in like record timing. Like I think he did the whole thing like in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And it is 100% him. And it still gets to the themes of the film, but like he wasn't going to like change himself or change where that comes from.
Right.
And I think that's really, and I think his whole career up until his passing was always like that.
Yeah, because he's motivated by that curiosity of what can I create?
Yes.
What do I feel is happening here? And so somebody at Prince's level can do that with a Batman film, right? But if you are just starting out as a maker, and you're just starting out as a musician, and somebody asks you to write something for their documentary film or their film or whatever, or their exhibit, or if you're working in a church context for a church service or something, and you're like, I'm going to write what I feel and I don't care what anybody else thinks. Probably not going to get paid. Probably not going to be asked to come back again.
Right.
So there's the challenge. There's the challenge for the maker, is that the artistic integrity is the most important thing to them. The authenticity is the most important thing to them of that experience and the art itself. And that can become difficult when you're trying to work with other people, especially when there's money involved. So this is the challenge in creating a career for a maker, is to be able to learn how to talk about your work with other people in ways that they can value, that you're sharing values, you understand their values, they understand yours, and it aligns. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having that level of creative integrity. It's just being able to communicate and make sure you're making strategic partnerships with people who are on board with your vision, or you're finding people who you can be on board with their vision. Another thing is connecting with people who have the same level of expectation around craftsmanship, because makers tend to be very high, have high expectations in the level of craftsmanship. And so it might get frustrating to work with people who are like, that's good enough. And you're like, that's not good enough for me. I'm not putting my name on this.
Right.
To be able to communicate that, but also to understand when is the time to say, my vision is the right vision. And when is the time to be able to say, okay, I can give a little, or time constraints are, that's the kind of thing there. But I do think, this distinction for somebody like a Prince or somebody like Bjork, like if you think about Bjork, she's so adorable for one thing, but she's so creative in every piece of who she is and the way that she sees the world. And both of these people have had a lot of industry success, but they're not, I wouldn't call either one of them, I don't know, we could argue about whether or not they're celebrities or like they've sought after celebrity. I feel like Prince in some ways kind of was like the sort of anti-celebrity. I mean, he was shy.
I mean, he changed his name to a symbol.
Right. How much less accessible can you get? You can't even say my name.
Search for this?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, they have incredible creative vision, which you might think, okay, so somebody with creative vision, that's an imaginative visionary. I almost said imaginary visionary again.
You're welcome.
That's an imaginative visionary. But what we're talking about when we talk about imaginative visionary, again, is motivation.
Right.
So they're motivated by the ideas of how things could look different. And in particular, how things could look different in the world or in a particular space, or how it could help people do things in a certain way. The maker is extremely visionary in their work, but it comes because they're obsessed with what their materials can do and what they can express through the materials, and have intense curiosity about what's possible with the art stuff itself. And it just so happens, I think, that a lot of people who do find success in the arts and entertainment industries actually are makers, because it takes a lot of dedication to just do the work consistently, day after day, year after year, to find success. Like, a lot of it is just a numbers game, being in the right place at the right time, being around long enough. There's tons of people in Hollywood who were quote unquote discovered after 10 or 15 years of working in the industry. But part of it is the odds of getting that kind of recognition or that work is just showing up and doing it because you love the chance to do it.
Right. And just like in the statements that we provide in this quiz, like the one about that the process for the maker is just as important as the outcome. I don't think Prince cared about how the soundtrack of Batman 1989 was going to come out.
He probably never thought about it again.
I think what Prince cared about was that he was so good that he could come up with his own vision for something that already had a vision. And he's like, well, this is the vision of the music. And here's the thing, I can play every freaking instrument on here and do it in the studio.
Yeah.
And it's quite astonishing to see some of that footage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about like the overlap of like another archetype, like the mystic?
Yeah, that's a good one, because the maker mystic feels, in fact, I think the maker mystic is probably its own little sub archetype.
There's always subgenres in music, Lisa.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, sorry. We're talking about archetypes.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what we were saying before, that everybody's probably a mixture. And I think that's helpful. That is really helpful to think about. Because the mystic, and we'll get into that later, but the mystic, it has a lot to do with making meaning for myself. It's the way I'm kind of using the art, its process, to help me figure myself out, the world, God. It's just where I go, almost like journaling. That's an oversimplification. But so those people may also be extremely dedicated to the craft. They may be very, very good at what they do in order to have the satisfaction, like find satisfaction from the work of their hands. But the important thing to think about, it's a great exercise to do that, to look at them all and think, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't really care about that. So you can create an understanding of what's important to you. If I didn't have this piece of it, I wouldn't want to do this anymore. Or why do I get out of bed in the morning? That's kind of coming to me as like the best way to talk about it. Like, why do I get out when I don't feel like it and I have to go to the studio today? Why am I going to the studio? Is it because if I do that, people are going to know who I am? Is it because if I do that, I'm going to get a paycheck? Is it if I do that, I'm going to change somebody's life? Is it because it's how I feel whole and grounded in the world? It may be a combination of those things, but not everybody has all of those. And that's one of the interesting things about the maker. I've really come to appreciate how different I am actually from that. And I think what we can learn from the maker is that attention to the process and the craft on a regular, dedicated basis actually does bring a lot of different kinds of results with it.
Like every episode when we talk about these archetypes, I love to just touch a little bit on possible challenges that this archetype could possibly run into.
Sure.
Not saying you will, but let's just talk about the possibilities.
Well, the first thing, we already kind of talked about this a little bit, was the need to create strategic partnerships with other people and be able to communicate why you do what you do. I think sometimes there is a lot, maybe even in a mystical standpoint, there is a lot of soulfulness happening underneath what the maker is doing, but they're not always as self-reflective to get the words to explain to other people why. So being able to do that. The other thing is, I think, and this is just observation, that perhaps they might be a little less trusting or concerned with institutions.
Right.
So when that comes to your spiritual life, what I've observed, a lot of makers will either not feel like they really need church, or they are involved in a church community or a spiritual community, but it doesn't have anything to do with their art making.
Yeah.
Like those two things just don't connect.
It's
for
like
them.
separate almost.
Yeah. And so that would be my challenge from soul makers is to think bigger about how those things connect, rather than like it has to be for something in particular.
Right.
Maybe that's where makers can kind of lean into the mystic side a little bit. And like I said before, to do that work of self-reflection, to connect that this is a gift from God, and you being grounded and shaped as a Christian in your spiritual life, and that focus on the becoming who you were created to be, marrying that into making what you were created to make, then what comes out, regardless of what it is still a fulfilling of a calling as an artist. And what you do end up giving to the world is very meaningful in whatever way God intends it to be. And that doesn't have to be your focus. You don't have to be worried about what the impact is, or what whether or not it fits into somebody else's categories. Concern yourself with where it's coming from, and go for it, and concern yourself with that, how you're making and the love of making, and trust that God is going to fill those spaces, fill those artifacts, fill those times with his spirit in whatever way he has intended. So that's the maker.
That's the maker.
In our next episode, we'll be talking with Jason Hamaker, who is local to the DC area. He owns a gallery. He's a photographer. He has an incredible story. He was also in the band Frodis. So he has a lot of interesting experience and is quite a maker. So we look forward to talking with him soon.
All right. See you next time. Thanks for listening to Be, Make, Do, a Soul Makers podcast. All links and resources are located in our show notes. What's your artist archetype? Are you the maker, the mystic, the soul healer, the imaginative visionary, the prophetic critic, or the storyteller? What's your archetype? Take the quiz at soulmakers.org/quiz.